Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. You'll Never Take Us Alive, written by Space Paladin 15. Honored panel of the Tenari officers. It is evident to us all why this court-martial has occurred. The weight of failure falls heavily on my shoulders. I submit my testimony to you today, that you may understand the events that led to our disastrous campaign. My fate is in your hands, and I will accept whatever judgment you see fit. It was an easy mission on paper, a Terran farming colony called Aru, and one of the fringes of the territory. It boasted few defense capabilities, and looked ripe for the taking. A plentiful harvest, enough to satisfy our army's needs on the Western Front, had just occurred. The food was currently stashed away in a large warehouse complex until it could be exported back to Earth. Confidence abounded in the planning room as we discussed our strategy. A simple ground occupation was all that we prepared for. First, our forces would capture the smaller farms outside of the main settlement. Then, we would storm the village and take the warehouse. There were only give or take 1,000 Terran soldiers on planet, who I did not believe would pose any real threat to us. We were greatly superior force in both numbers and weaponry. The civilians were simple farmers, armed with rags and pitchforks. There shouldn't have been anything difficult about it. Minimal damage to the agricultural system was the utmost important, as the goal of the operation was to secure their food supply. According to our dossiers, the humans were well suited to manual labor, so they would make ideal slaves. After our victory, the farmers would be forced to grow crops for us. Aru could supply our troops for many cycles. I motioned our progress through the reports sent from our ground commanders. The first night of deployment was a massive success. A small force of human soldiers met us at our landing site, but after a brief exchange of fire, they retreated. What a pathetic, cowardly display, I thought at the time. The mission could be wrapped up in no time. With the land outside of the city under our control, it was time to close in our main objective. There was one dirt road leading into town, cutting through the woodland that surrounded it on all sides. Our troops boarded armored vehicles and proceeded along the route. Not a sign of the Terran military anywhere, just trees and dusty terrain. The distinct lack of opposition should have been the first sign that something was amiss. But the convoy was caught completely off guard by a high-pitched beeping sound, followed by a blast of enormous magnitude. The lead vehicle of our procession went up in a plume of fire and shrapnel, jarring and skewing its occupants. When the car behind had navigated around the wreckage, it too was blown to bits. That made it plain that the original explosion was not an isolated event. The team radioed back to the command ship requesting a scan of the road. We discovered that it was littered with crude explosives, presumably triggered by pressure or proximity. Driving to our destination would be impossible. That road was the only way in or out of the city by vehicle. The idea of aerial transport was tossed around, but human surface-to-air missile capabilities made it risky as well. So, I gave our soldiers the order to abandon their vehicles and travel by foot through the woods. And that is where the true horror began. You see, that was when the human soldiers were hiding. We had played right into their hands. They could survive out in the wilderness just fine, and they knew how to avoid their own traps. But we were not so lucky. The primitive devices picked off more of my men than I would like to admit. Within our first day out there, we already had numerous injuries and casualties. A sergeant wandered off on his own to scour for food and was only located hours later by a search party. He was hanging upside down from a tree, bound in rope net. It appeared that he had wrapped up so tight that the blood circulation to his brain had been cut off. A trio set off to check potential campsite for hostiles and was found impaled on spikes at the bottom of a pit. It appeared that the trap had been covered up, so that when our scouts crossed over it, the ground gave way beneath their feet. A simple, yet clever invention. After that incident, word spread through our ranks quickly that everyone needed to watch their step. The humans themselves slunk around in the shadows, typically ambushing us under the cover of night. It became commonplace for the Tanari soldiers to sleep with their rifles in their beds, and all of our people were cautioned not to wander off alone. Even as we traveled by day, we learned to keep an eye on the sky. The humans loved to climb trees and snipe us from above. We eliminated any Terrans that we saw, but they seemed to always kill a few of us first. But of all the human tactics that were recorded in our field reports, the most terrifying was the aptly labeled suicide bomber. They would strap explosive vests to their bodies, then charge at groups of our soldiers. It was quite effective, sometimes claiming death counts in the hundreds. A people with such a disregard for their own lives, it was clear to me that we were dealing with a species that was truly mad. As our soldiers watched their comrades fall around them, we had a growing issue with desertion. A few even reportedly tried to defect to the human side. Morale amongst our forces was at an all-time low. Many ground commanders pleaded with me to order a retreat, but after suffering such heavy losses, I did not want us to leave Aru empty-handed. There had to be some compensation, something to justify this operation. Following my orders, the remaining troops pressed on to the city and snuffed out the last of the human soldiers. We'd achieved victory. But at what cost? Our ranks, which had once numbered 200,000 infantrymen, were now whittled down to 10,000. Many of the survivors were traumatized or maimed for life. With no Terran soldiers left to ward off the invasion, it seemed intuitive that the civilians would have to surrender. I wanted to see us claim the spoils of our hard-fought battle firsthand, so I asked one of our communication officers to stream footage live to headquarters. It was all on screen as they marched into the human settlement. All I could do was stare at the images before me, slack-jawed in disbelief. Fires raged all around our forces as they made their way through the fields and houses. Human civilians were rallying each other into a frenzy, dousing everything in sight with accelerants. What in the stars were they doing? Well, it was obvious what they were doing, but not why. My best guess is that they were motivated by pure spite, because there is no rational explanation for their behavior. The humans would rather see their home burn to ash than have it fall into our hands. I hope that, whatever verdict of my trial is, we learn from what happened on Aru. A ground occupation of human territory must never be attempted again, because, unlike a normal species, they do not concede defeat, even when they know that it is hopeless, even when all is lost. They fight to their last breath, and they fight with a clever savagery that we can never match. I remember watching as our soldiers rushed towards the center of town. There was still the faint hope that we could salvage something from the warehouse. As clear as if it were yesterday, I could see the human farmer standing by himself in the street, watching the flames with a smile on his face. He turned to face the approaching troops and gestured towards the burning husk of a silo behind him. "I'm sorry. Were you guys looking for this? Better luck next time, I suppose." A Tanari officer raised his rifle at the civilian. "I order you, in the name of the king, to surrender to our supreme army immediately." The human brandished his taunt and stared back defiantly. Other civilians joined in at his side, armed with any blunt objects that they could pick up. Surely, they knew that it would be a slaughter. And yet, they were ready to charge into battle anyways. "You'll never take us alive!" End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 patrons and channel members. Alithia, Barky, Fudic Yol, Cam Maxwell, Casper Onholtz, Whitebag 420, Lord Asrakal, Arcadian, and Oakfield.